performing team. I will be talking about the pillars that underlay the team's success and explaining how they helped us overcome some common challenges faced by many large tech teams. Although I hope you come away with some useful insights that apply to any sort of team or any sort of position you're in, large or small. Let's begin, though, with a story. We'll start right at the beginning. I would like you all to cast your minds way, way back through the mists of time to 2019, when the world was a very different place. And this guy, Peter Dalton, was in charge of a transformation and simplification project called ANZX. The original goal was to build new, simplified back-end APIs. And if the project was successful, there was really going to be no customer visible changes. However, there were discussions at the board level. ANZ wasn't sure that this went far enough. The question was raised about why would we spend all of this money and at the end of the project, nothing will have changed for our customers. It was decided that ANZX should also produce a new mobile app built on top of those APIs. It should be a simple, elegant app that just works, grounded in the idea of improving customers' financial well-being. We were not going to migrate existing customer accounts. This would be something separate and new that people signed up for. And lastly, the app wasn't going to be something that we were going to throw away in 5 years' time. This was to lay the foundations for what ANZ should be doing digitally far into the future. Mantell was brought into the project very early on to form a core part of the team. In particular, we focused on laying the technical foundations along with building a strong engineering culture. And as ANZ grew their team, more people from Mantell Group, my employer, were brought in to help the team scale. We worked to propagate that strong engineering culture and practices out amongst the new teams that were being formed. Our people worked very closely with ANZ employees, embedded as part of their squads. And so this was a highly important project, both for us and for ANZ. 5 years down the track, ANZ now has around 1,400 people working in the ANZX program. If you want to check out the app after the presentation, you can go to the URL here. Signing up for an account can be done from your mobile phone. It typically takes under 3 minutes. By any measure, the program has been a great success. The app's proven very popular. We're currently at 4.8 stars in the Play Store. From a financial perspective, ANZ Plus is performing very well. It's rapidly acquiring customers, so quickly, in fact, that we're the fastest growing new digital bank within Australia. And those customers have a dramatically lower cost to acquire and cost to serve. And there's been a stream of new features released, such as joint accounts, add-ins, home loans, roundups. On the engineering side, the team has grown from 5 developers in a room to what we believe is the largest mobile team in the Southern Hemisphere. This graph overlays our monthly commits into the code base. For the most part, these contributions have scaled with the team size. The more people we add, the faster we go. Which I think for me as an engineering manager is one of the things I'm most proud about with this project. The last thing that really blows me away, though, about this graph is that as part of the mobile leadership team, I barely noticed this bit here. Back at the start of 2022, things were running really well and the team was humming over. And then midway through 2023, I kind of looked around and realized that somehow, with very little drama, the team had almost tripled in size. And that's because in this part of the project, we were laying those foundations that allowed us to scale effortlessly. So how did we do that? We started off with nothing but a few people in a room and a vision. ANZX was a completely greenfield project. How did we execute on that vision? As we built out the team and the product, we evolved 10 pillars. Each pillar reinforces the others, and together they form a blueprint for our success. The first is that vision, a simple, elegant, high-quality app that just works. The ANZ Plus mobile team is persistently funded and will own the app forever. We don't operate off project-based funding. The mobile team is driven by a set of shared values. There's a heavy focus on communication and transparency to share context and reduce silos. Engineers are empowered, curious problem solvers, operating in a strong engineering culture. The ANZ Plus app is a rich client application built on native mobile technology. And mobile invests in building technology that's shared across the team. The platform and enablement team helps drive alignment and autonomy. The app shipped at a rapid pace with a continuous stream of value being delivered to our customers. This is a fun one. We drive towards zero tech debt. And lastly, our values remain constant, but the way they are expressed by the team evolves. The team's structure, size, direction, all change in response to everything. We're never perfect, always evolving and always learning. Now, this blueprint that I just showed worked really well in a greenfield environment. It also helped out that the ANZ program was very well funded. And it would be easy for you folks in the audience to sit there and think, oh, well, of course these things are simple to do if you have all that funding and no legacy there. And you might be right about that. But I do invite you to remember that having no legacy was a deliberate and bold product choice that ANZX made right at the start. Banks also operate in a highly regulated environment and are very risk adverse. ANZ is one of Australia's oldest organisations and has a huge amount of history and inertia behind it. So not everybody has these opportunities or these threats. With that said, there are many useful things we learned along this journey that apply to any environment. And for the most part, you don't need a truckload of money to do them. Each one of these items here could be a whole presentation on its own. And in fact, I do have some other talks that focus on a few of these pillars. But rather than doing a deep dive into any one particular area, I wanted to keep things at a high level and talk about 6 key challenges that large software development projects are going to face and explain how these pillars helped us overcome them. The first of which is the problem of alignment, also known as what are we even doing? Some audience participation. Hands up those who have worked on a project where you're like, why is this happening and what am I even doing here before? Wow, we've almost got the entire room. This is because it is disturbingly common that companies will spin up projects, hire entire teams and budget millions of dollars without having a clear vision of what they actually want to achieve. Other times companies have that vision, it is present in the senior leadership, but it never makes its way down to the people doing the actual work. The engineer's day-to-day just looks like an endless backlog of Jira tasks and meetings. How will you arrive at your destination if you don't know where you want to go and how you want to get there? We address this by having a strong product vision coupled with a values-driven team. The strong vision was there right from the start. That simple, elegant app that just works, grounded in the idea of improving customers' financial well-being. There are a few things that I saw Peter do continuously over the course of the project that reinforce this. Firstly, he was a tireless advocate for that vision, constantly reinforcing what we wanted to do and elaborating on what that actually meant. Also, that vision had to be tangible, something you could hold. So we leaned heavily into prototyping and interactive demos to make it visible for people. That vision also allowed us to be ruthless when it came to deciding what we were not going to do. The quickest way to solve a problem is by not having it at all. Our vision allowed us to keep things simple. In addition to the vision, the mobile team was driven by a shared set of values. And they are: do the right thing and do the thing right. Own it. A unified team building a unified app. Care personally and challenge directly. I think one of the most interesting things about these values is that I didn't write them. In fact, nobody on our leadership team wrote them. What happened is one of our engineers, this guy here called Daewin, joined the project, took a look around and said, wow, the culture here is really great. We should write something down so we don't lose it. And so they did. The engineers got together, had a couple of meetings, did some brainstorming, and came up with the values you saw on the previous slide. And I believe really strongly those values need to come from the team, come from the engineers, because ultimately they're the ones building the thing. They're the ones who need to live by those values. Now, I'm going to pause for a minute and point out that a funny thing does tend to happen when we start talking about vision and values, particularly with engineers. Eyeballs. They start rolling. Why? Why do people respond like this when we start, oh, all the vision and values? It's because these days everybody has a set of vision and values. I'm sure if I went to your company's website and searched for them, I would find some. Who knows, perhaps they're even on posters in your kitchen or on your corporately mandated desktop background. Yeah, a few people nodding in recognition there. The thing is, without empowerment, vision and values are useless. If your job is to follow a process and do what your boss tells you to do, all that vision and values we just talked about, it's just so much empty corporate speak. It's high-minded language with no practical application on your day-to-day job. However, if your job is not to do what your boss tells you to do, if it's instead to deliver the vision while following the values, then all that stuff I just went through is of enormous practical importance. It's literally a day-to-day diet on what you should be doing. It's a description of your job. That vision and values meant the engineers could rely on principles to make their own decisions, not just blindly following a process or the corporate hierarchy. People could self-manage. When you put it all together, it allowed us to scale rapidly and quickly. It's one of the things that underlies that graph you saw a couple of pages back. The second challenge is unlocking the power and productivity of engineers. What do I mean unlocking the power and productivity of engineers? Everyone's like, it's easy. You just sit them down at the desk and tell them to do their job. It's not quite that simple, is it? It turns out companies are kind of insane when it comes to engineers. We will pay absolutely top dollar to acquire the very best engineering talent and then micromanage their every moment. We surround them by process and feed them work which has been sliced down into tiny segments by other people, rather than allowing them to exercise their engineering craft. We place them in a production line running off Jira, and then we wonder why they're disengaged and ineffective. We knew that if we're going to be successful, that bold vision at ANZ, we're going to need to tap into the full power of our engineers to build a team of empowered engineers in an engineering-led culture. Why empower engineers? Why not empower your Scrum Masters or your receptionist or your board of directors? The answer is you should empower all of those people as well. Empowering people is an ethical good, irrespective of any financial benefit that comes out of it. But why engineers specifically? Why was empowering them so extraordinarily effective at ANZ? Engineers, it turns out, have a superpower. They can create and understand the code. They intimately understand the tools and technologies, what they are capable of, and the specific conditions in the code base right now. But they can also understand the business situation and goals, the broader product vision, strategy, competitive environment. Engineers are the only ones in your organization who have the visibility necessary to synthesize both of these views together. They can see all of the pieces of the puzzle, and by dint of the fact they can write code, they can act in the most effective way possible to improve things for your customers. This is why empowering engineers is the best bang for your buck you will ever get. By removing processes, by giving more autonomy and ownership to engineers, time after time, we were able to see them come up with novel, creative, and efficient solutions at a really practical level. How did we actually do it? It turns out you can't just stand on a podium and declare everybody empowered. That is not how it works. You can't create an empowered environment out of whole cloth. Instead, you need to build an environment that then creates that empowerment for you. This is how we created that environment. The number one thing is to avoid at all costs systems where senior personnel are deciding what junior personnel are doing. In fact, we tried to avoid distinction between senior and junior people at all. You can't be empowered if it's your job to do what you're told to do by somebody else. Engineers are responsible for their own time and understand opportunity cost. I was constantly telling them, you should always be spending your time doing whatever you think will deliver the most value. If that's your squad work or something else, that is for you to decide. It is not your job to do what I tell you. It is not your job to do what your product owner tells you. Sorry to the product owners in the audience this evening. It's their job to deliver the vision while following the values. Another constant refrain was silos, but only knee-high. Every part of the code base was open for contribution. Anybody could go in and change anything if they thought it would be an improvement. And in fact, everybody was responsible for everything. Things like the quality of the code base, how well the team is running, achieving our vision and our goals. These are the responsibility of all the engineers. If they saw a problem with any of these things, it was their job to speak up and fix it. All this resulted in heavy collaboration between engineers across the whole team to solve problems, both large and small. At its peak, the mobile team had over 170 Android and iOS engineers. Now, if you have only a few engineers, your team structure really isn't much of a problem. They all just sit together in one team, a couple of desks together in the office, a Slack channel together on Slack. But as your headcount gets larger and you need to break up the team and organize people, how you do that becomes a critical problem, one that will make or break your ability to scale. Our third critical challenge is how to organize the team and how to structure it for efficiency and flow. Let's see if this sounds familiar to people. Many organizations, there are separate product, design, engineering, QA, and ops teams. And to build anything, it has to go through multiple handovers. Each team is responsible for only a small slice of any given problem. Sometimes this is compounded by running the teams off either project-based funding models or artificially separating budgets out into build and run. This setup is inflexible and inefficient, and it also incentivizes this thing of throwing tasks over the wall for the next team to sort out. Oh, I've done my task, it's in the QA column, it's nothing to do with me anymore. This creates silos between teams, and that end-to-end flow of value is impeded by all of these handovers. Instead, we bring together all the people needed to deliver something into a team oriented around a single valuable customer focus. For example, transactions, payments, or cards. The mobile team consisted of many of these squads, each of which owned an individual area of the app. Each squad is empowered to build and deliver value as quickly safely, independently as possible, without requiring all those handovers to ship the work. Having these persistent teams unlocks big efficiencies as they improve over time and learn based on monitoring and customer feedback. They're also responsible for that long-term health of their code. There's a heavy focus on tasks, not job titles. Everybody in the squad's responsible for the overall success of the whole team, which means you all need to be cross-functional. Team members pick up and own work that's important and that they're passionate about. But if we want to achieve efficiency, it's not just enough to give the team ownership of their area, also has to have autonomy. Without autonomy, end-to-end flow will be inhibited because you're always going to get blocked waiting for somebody else to do the work that you need to be successful. Partially, that autonomy comes from teams containing all of the people that it needs. Partially, that autonomy actually comes from the clear set of vision and values, which allows them to self-manage and decide things for themselves without going back to their boss all the time to ask if what they're doing is right or wrong. But even with these things in place, it's often necessary to work with code that's owned by other teams. For example, the payment team might need to modify the way that transactions displays. Tell me, what do you think would happen if the payments team goes to the transactions team and says, hey, have you got any space in your backlog to make these changes for you? Hands up, does anybody in the room think they'll go, yeah, we've got loads of room in our backlog. We'll hop on that right away. For those remote, not a single hand was raised. Instead, the payments team needs to be able to change the transactions code directly to do the work themselves. This is why it's important that we should have no silos. Engineers can work in any part of the code base, which unlocks flexibility. You're not going to become blocked waiting for other teams to complete their work. But to make this level of autonomy feasible, we also need to have this thing called alignment. You can't just jump into some random part of the code base and create a giant mess. Or if there already is a giant mess there, it's going to be very hard to jump in and contribute to. The mobile team invested heavily in driving alignment, focusing on code quality, tools, communication, and education. Our fourth big challenge was how to invest in building the technology that allowed these squads to be effective. Now, I know everybody on the room is at the cutting edge of a lot of hard things in tech and our problems. So you may not believe me when I say it, but by and large, organizations are actually pretty good at building and delivering features. They tend to optimize their teams and processes around delivering them. There's a lot of push from management to get things done, ship more stuff to the customer. We've got that part down kind of okay. But unfortunately, this means that often the tech that backs those features is left as an afterthought. Developers struggle to get the time to invest in architecture and frameworks, and tech debt multiplies. Does this sound familiar at all? I've seen it get so bad that engineers are forced by their own organization's processes to hide the work that they're doing, the essential tech work that they're doing. Engineers just double their estimates when it comes time to estimate and just do all the tech tasks that they need to do on the side. Absolute anti-bat. We did not want this to happen. So to make an explicit investment in technology, we created platform and enablement teams, which sat outside the normal squads. Both the type of teams that are not responsible for delivering customer-facing work, they're instead there to assist those other squads. The mobile platform team built out our UI component library. They created many of the tools which allowed us to modularize our code base, including a suite of unit tests which help automatically check that our teams were aligned to the architecture. If you break the app architecture, a unit test will fail. The platform team created the core frameworks for interacting with the server to synchronize data, built out a dependency injection system, and all of the code that handled session information. The enablement team's task is to facilitate squads gaining new capabilities. They helped our squads migrate the entire code base over to Jetpack Compose, which was a complex year-long initiative that rebuilt the entire UI layer of our app. Enablement helps support the code-based modularization effort, helping squads to figure out how to break up their own code. They also were there to provide more focused help to specific teams. For example, they helped the transactions team remove scalability bottlenecks in their code. Many of you, actually, I'll do a show of hands. Who's heard of platform and enablement teams before? It's actually a pretty good number of hands up inside the room. We're seeing these things as concepts that are gaining more and more traction in the industry. But there's a few anti-patterns we see in how people are applying them, but we wanted to make sure we avoided. Firstly, in many organizations, these type of squads tend to get sucked into a resource augmentation or hit squad goal. They get thrown in to help push struggling deliverables over the line, or they get called in to help fix messes that are created by other squads due to delivery pressure. And I've been in the room for these meetings. It's so tempting. You've got this super important feature that was promised by a particular date. You've got this team of your very best engineers just sitting there doing who knows what down in the depths of the platform architecture. And you go, oh, could we just bring them over here and get them to get that feature across the line? It's so tempting. The problem is that squads need to be responsible for the long-term health and support of their code. If there's problems going on, it's not Enablement's job to come in and fix it. Getting them to hop in a resource augmentation role or getting them to jump in and fix up other people's tech debt is a misuse of platform and enablement squads, and it squanders their potential. Instead, those enablement and platform teams are best used to help supercharge your squads by helping drive that alignment and autonomy. They drive the autonomy by giving squads components and skills to do things themselves. They build that alignment by creating and sharing the technology and processes across the teams. So by investing in the technological and engineering foundations, platform enablement teams build tech wealth. That's what they're there for, not to get dragged into remediating tech debt. Second last challenge, we're almost there. Turns out releasing mobile apps is really, really hard. And it turns out, in fact, releasing any app is hard. Releases tend to come with a heavy process overhead. Lots of QA, you've got sign-offs, you've got meetings, people want to manage risks and talk about them. On mobile, this is compounded by the fact that you're shipping essentially a giant monolith. On the back end, microservices at least allow teams to ship parts of their system independently. On mobile, everything needs to come together in one big thing at once. So one of my favorite quotes is, if it hurts, do it more often. So we leaned heavily into continuous delivery to ship the app. We deployed to the app stores twice a week, which is actually going faster than Facebook does. We benchmarked against them. On average, is 8 days from a PR being raised until the code's out there in production, running on customers' phones, managing their real money. Our delivery performance, as assessed by the DORA delivery metrics, is better than 80% of other organizations in the financial services sector. And that includes all of those back-end teams that have got stuff like microservices and pipelines that deploy their stuff every time a commit goes in. How do we do this? Firstly, we automated absolutely everything. We used automation to help provide QA and security and worked hard to automate away all the manual processes associated with releasing. Our Git strategy was another key. We did not have release, feature, and bug fix branches. Everything existed in a short, targeted branch that was merged immediately into our main branch. And at any point, the main branch was suitable for releasing to our customers. How can we be continually merging all of that code into main and shipping it directly out to our users? This is managing my actual real money. How am I confident that this is going to be safe? To do this, we made extensive use of feature flagging. When a new feature was built, it's hidden behind a feature flag. This allowed us to merge that code and ship it without fear that incomplete features would be exposed to our users. And all that heavier process, the things around legal approvals, marketing, and so on, are now shifted from deploying the app to when the feature is enabled. And because the flags can be turned on or off at any time, it gave teams that autonomy, which we know is so vital, around when their features were released. While the mobile app was deployed twice weekly as that monolith, the features could be turned on and off independently of each other by toggling a remote flag. Our last pillar of continuous delivery is consciously shifting as many of our processes as possible to the left so that they happen earlier. In particular, we focus on quality assurance and testing. Instead of having QA roles, we had quality coaches who work closely with the engineers to help build that quality in from the start of the process, not after the fact. This focus on building in quality earlier meant you would see extensive discussion on pull requests. Look at this. We've got a screenshot from GitHub. It says this pull request has 63 comments on there. Who would look at that as a warning sign or actually be afraid about seeing that in their organization? Yeah, I can see a few hands going up. At ANZ, we lean into this. We look at this and go, this is great. People are having these all-important discussions. Each pull request would come with a test plan in it that was written by the developer and executed by the engineers reviewing the request. That plan had to pass before we would merge. Because we were shipping twice a week, that main branch always needed to be in a state we were very comfortable in shipping to our customers. Now, this does mean that pull requests took longer. You can see here in my diagram, the dev phase is larger. Doing the development quicker is a non-goal, but the overall end-to-end process is much shorter. Rather than an extensive QA process before each release, we have a very short check that essentially all the paperwork is in order and we're confident that we check the quality of the code that we're about to release. Our last challenge is building sustainably. What do I mean by that? Does this sound familiar, folks? Actually, I'm loving the audience participation I had. How many people have been on what we like to call sometimes a death march project? Oh yeah, some hands have shot up. A project where you know you're not going to reach, or maybe you're barely ever going to reach the end and things are going wrong the whole way and you're just slogging on through it and slogging on through it. I have been involved in a number of projects where the team strained mightily to hit a particular release deadline and we succeeded. But after it's done, the team falls apart due to burnout. And you look at the code base and it turns out it's a mess of rushed code and cut corners. This wasn't an option for ANZ Plus. We're aiming to lay the foundations for what ANZ will be doing digitally far into the future. So we leaned into my favorite little principle, the conversation stopper, zero tech debt. Zero tech debt, what's that mean? Actually all about balancing off tech and feature work. For the long-term sustainability of the system, we must have a strong bias towards writing good code. But at the same time, we can't delay shipping features forever trying to perfect things. We need a bias towards merging code and actually shipping it. We need to be asking ourselves how we deliver code of the highest quality quickly to our customers and continue to do so far into the future. Here we have an entirely made up graph that shows tech debt over time. And because we are striving hard for zero and continually investing in improving the code base, that tech debt goes down. But then something interesting happens. It just leapt up vertically. What happened? What has occurred is that we've learned something new. Perhaps we got feedback from our customers that sent us off in a different product direction, meaning our current code is unsuitable. Perhaps the new technologies or libraries have been released and become viable. What hasn't happened here is us purposely slapping together bad code because we were in a rush. There are so many ways as engineers for us to learn, and this frequently leads to code that was fine yesterday becoming tech debt today. So one thing we can never do is make things worse by tossing in code we already know isn't up to scratch when we write it. As soon as we learn that we've got unsuitable code, we make a plan to remediate it and execute that plan as quickly as possible. But again, we're always learning that previously suitable code is now unsuitable. What matters is not hitting 0. You'll never be able to do it. What matters is these lines. We're always driving towards 0 hard, heading in the right direction. And we must constantly drive towards 0 because the only other alternative is a graph that goes like this. So you can see that while there are sometimes the tech debt is paid down, the long-term trend here is clearly upwards. This code base is not going to last 10 years. What did that drive towards 0 look like? What are the practical things on the ground that made it happen? Firstly, it meant prioritizing really simple tech that was easy to change because we knew that in the future we would definitely have to change it. This also meant constantly having conversations within the mobile team and within the business about how we're investing in tech, what our priorities were. The enablement and platform teams were able to guide many of these conversations and provide support for the engineers in the squads. When we discovered tech debt, we'd always develop a plan for how we would remediate it. And this meant we did not shy away from making very large cross-cutting changes. Some big examples were in mobile, the transition to Jetpack Compose in Android. We completely rewrote the entire UI layer of the app. There was a constant stream of large and bold changes in play. We also made sure that we completed these migrations. You cannot just leave them half done. And lastly, we tied this all together with a code health dashboard. The dashboard shows code owned by each squad, evaluated against a bunch of metrics that the engineers have agreed is really important to them. Things like unit test coverage, warnings, the team's progress against completing various system-wide migrations. And each week within the Android team, the mobile team, we'd sit down and talk through this dashboard and discuss the changes to the scores and future areas of focus. I'm going to wrap up with one last closing thought. It is all related. Let's pick a random item. For example, my favorite zero tech debt that we were just talking about. To make it work, it really helps to have platform and enablement teams. You're also going to need empowered engineers to help pick that right balance between tech and delivery. They'll need to be working in long-lived teams who are responsible for the health of their code far into the future. Shipping rapidly helps out a lot. It allows you to incrementally sort out problems. And lastly, none of that was going to happen without those vision and values. Each one reinforces and strengthens the others. And part of the success of ANZX is that we're able to execute all of them together in combination. But if you're feeling intimidated by the scope of all this, there's some good news as well. You don't need to do everything, everywhere, all at once. Each one of these items works great just on its own by itself. You could pick any one and drop it into a team and it will improve things. Most of them don't actually need an investment, a huge investment anyway. Vision and values, empowered engineers. This stuff's all basically free. I would argue that structuring teams for end-to-end flow, shipping faster, and zero tech debt actually save money in the long term, but there is an initial investment to set these things up. And all of these have a multiplying effect. Once you've introduced one or two, it gets easier to add in more. So to sum up, to finish, this is possible to do. It's possible to do in smaller teams and with less money than ANZ has. And it has real, practical, and measurable impacts. Thank you. We are at my questions now.
So we're going to try using the microphone at the same time as Luke's laptop microphone. So if you're watching remote and there's weird issues with the audio, just let us know and we will stop doing this because I have not tried this before. Thank you very much, Luke. That was a great presentation. I've got a bunch of questions, which I'm going to have to grab you for a beer at some point to go through. But I was trying to think of the one to ask that was forefront in my mind, and the main one that kept coming back to me is this idea of teams kind of contributing everywhere and an open contribution, which I think is a great idea. But I can see some issues around things that do need a little bit of structure around them, say security and compliance and those areas. How do you kind of have both of those things going on, where you've got teams who have open contribution everywhere, but still kind of make sure you're doing your due diligence and checking your boxes for security and compliance?
That is a great question that cuts into the core of a lot of the things we're doing there. Do you remember those values we had right at the start? The team values. One of them was own it, which means like we're all responsible for everything. You're all responsible for security. You're all responsible for compliance. Well, guess what? It doesn't scale. As that graph went up, as we added more engineers, saying that everybody owns it turns out to mean that actually nobody owns it. So we needed to get to, and we hit this point in the leadership team where we're like, this own it thing, it's not working. Do we need to give up on that as a value? We talked to the team and we're like, what do we do here? And they're like, no, we love this own it value. We can't give this. This is part of who we are. We realized that what we actually need to do was double down on that value by describing who owns what very clearly and starting to put some of these boundaries in place so people could understand who was responsible for each of these things. So stuff like security, stuff like compliance, we had specific people that were responsible for those things. They were actually there from the start. We had a special security person. We had some special people there to help with compliance. An actual better example was our build system that was everybody's responsibility and constantly broken. So what did we do there? We actually got a team in, we designated people. There was their role and their responsibility to make sure that build pipeline was running and flowing effectively. And it had a counterintuitive result to me. The build system was a terrifying thing that no engineer was, every engineer was scared to touch. Do you think once we had a team responsible for it, contributions went up or down? Maybe down a few guesses. They actually went up because the team was confident that they could touch it and not break it, and there'd be somebody there to support them and help them there. So that value of ownership, that bit of being open to contribution, having everybody contribute to everything, was actually made stronger by having people who had that a particular area as their core responsibility. It meant that people were confident and happy to jump in and do it, and it became a manageable, tractable problem for them, not a, oh my God, the build's down, where do I even begin with this again?
Brilliant, thank you. And we've had confirmation that it does seem to be working, so that's good. Okay, if you're remote and you want to ask a question, just please send a message and I will get to you. Any in-person questions?
Hey, on the Zero Tech Deb, just applying patterns I've seen on bigger projects. Let's say some less functional companies, they tend to tie a whole bunch of different features all together for a release. This puts a lot of pressure on, okay, some teams finish early, other teams are going to start rushing. Terrible, terrible, terrible.
Yep.
I'm guessing you've decoupled all the features to the point where teams are working fast, but they're taking as long as they need.
Exactly. And it actually goes into that release process. Sorry, was that the thing with the question mark at the end? Or did you...
Well, that's pretty much, well, the question is that the solution? Decouple the features? Or is there some way to somehow solve this if everything's tied together? I think that's just a disaster to be avoided.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely around decoupling the features. It's absolutely around that autonomy, because trying to coordinate everything, as you've seen, it causes all this pain. It causes all these terrible pressures where teams are, some of them are sitting around twiddling their thumbs. Oh, we got our work done ages ago. Other ones are absolutely under the pump and doing very bad things to try and meet the code. The key thing for us came from the decoupling releasing a feature, which happens when the feature flag gets switched on remotely, from deploying the code to users' phones via the Play Store and App Store. And that deployment of the code, it just happens twice a week automatically behind the scenes. It happens so regularly that it's an absolute utter non-event. And a lot of these bigger things happen around when you want to turn on your feature flag. It's still hard, like it's still difficult, but at least you don't need to coordinate with 7 other teams at the same time. You can just kind of go, oh yeah, look, we need to spend an extra 3 days on this because it's not ready yet, so we're going to spend the 3 days. An analogy that I heard from somebody that I liked a lot was around the trains. I remember years ago, I used to commute into work and the trains came once every half hour. And they were so infrequent, like I got really panicked. I'm going to miss the train. I've got to rush to get in there. I was sprinting to the train station. Now they're coming every 10 minutes. I'm like, it's fine. Like the next, I miss this one, it's going to be like another 7 minutes and then the next one will be there. It's like that with releases. That decoupling and acceleration helped significantly with this problem.
The other thing that does for mobile apps specifically is it's notoriously difficult to get people to update the versions of their mobile app, and especially on Android.
Oh, yeah.
By decoupling those two things, you've got a much bigger chance that somebody's actually going to get the new feature release because they've had the code weeks ago.
Thank you. Oh, that's weird. Okay, so you talked about empowering the team to be able to make their own decisions. I guess at the start, especially in banking, you are really risk adverse. So I was wondering, how did you get the management to trust the team that they can make the right decisions, especially at the start?
The facetious answer, COVID lockdowns, believe it or not. We had a really critical, it's almost a happenstance. We had a really critical stage like early in the project where we were starting to scale and we were starting to look like, what does the future look like? And that would typically be the stage where a whole bunch of process and management and overhead and things come in to play and start getting added to a project. We'd had previously a couple of passionate developers in a room just banging out really great stuff, and we're all waiting for the hammer to fall and management to say, all right, calm down there, kiddies. The adults are in the room now. This is getting big. We're going to add in all of these things. And instead, a COVID lockdown occurred and everybody went remote. And a funny thing actually happened. A lot of that management side of the organization actually took a while to adapt to that situation and really connect and figure out how to work in that environment. The engineers just kept on shipping and delivering stuff, and we're like, oh yeah, we know how to do this. We're all in Discord servers and know how to live stream and all of that good stuff. And by the time things really started to settle down out of that period of uncertainty, the engineering culture had really become very established and very baked in. The other thing that happened, like, that's not reproducible. That's never going to happen again. Although maybe the lesson is that if you leave engineers alone to like do their own thing and build that great stuff and step back, they'll take it and run with it. But another critical thing that came in, I'm going to give you 3 bits. There's the COVID lockdown. The other more actionable critical thing is we got really great engineering leadership on that understood this and was deeply on board with it and wanted to accelerate it. We had some senior hires. Again, the engineers were very worried. Is this the time when the adults are in the room, folks? Calm down now. They came in, they looked and like, this is amazing. Like, I want to double down on it. How do I empower you folks more? How do I back away more process to allow you to do all of these things? We want more of it. So leadership actually plays an enormously key role in fighting for the space and laying out the vision for that stuff to happen. And the third thing, I think there was always, it comes back to that vision and it comes back to that values. Going right back to the start, the inception of the project, it was always there that we wanted to do something significantly different, that we didn't want to run business as usual, that we wanted to be a little bit out there and do things in a different way. And having that there right from the very start gave the space for all of those other things to happen. So ultimately, number one, a real bit of good luck. Secondly, some really good hires and good leadership from people. And thirdly, setting the conditions and environment, the vision for this to occur.
Any more questions?
So you talked about empowered engineers and autonomy. What about you said, sorry, product owners. What about figuring out what to build and coordinated building and roadmaps, and how did that work?
Oh yeah, product owners are super important for that. But they're only a team member with a specialty and a strong opinion and a really strong grounding in what needs to be built. The critical thing is that the product owners should not have been there to manage developers and engineers' time and tell them what to work on. The product owners should be there to provide a really valuable customer perspective and provide that vision, that situational awareness for the engineers to make really good choices about how they spend the time. But they're not the ones that have the veto over what an engineer is doing day to day. They're the ones to provide that business perspective that the developers then bring together with the code perspective and make those decisions on how to move the dial. Now, I'm hedging what I'm saying with a lot of should and because it turns out it's really hard to put this in place. And if you hire a bunch of people in, they tend to fall back to what they already know. So we'd set up all of this empowerment and things, and we'd put people in teams, and then the engineers would be like, product owner, give me my Jira card, please. I will move it to the in progress column. And the product owner would be like, great, I've set up 57 Jira things, and you please, and we'd be like, no, this is not how you should be working. So we needed to work really hard with the team to really lay out that vision and explain what we were aiming for and how we would like to work, and both get those product owner side of things on board, but also the engineers on board, and let them see that there are other ways of doing things.
We'll probably have three more questions, so just start thinking.
I just want to know, typically the new hires that you do for your engineering team, they're used to a certain way of working, right? And what I'm hearing here, it's very different than what they're used to. So then how did you affect this cultural change in their day-to-day?
Yeah, how did we deal with the new hires and the fact that this may be very different, which is a hard problem? There was a couple of things. Firstly, we were fairly considered around who we hired. We had a quite engineering-centric interview process where basically we just got some engineers in a room with the person and had a good chat to them about tech. We just geeked out about stuff. And what we were actually looking for is not like correct answers from them. It's just like they've done some stuff and they got real strong opinions about something. Doesn't need to be our opinion, but they need to have a really good opinion. Secondly, we had a really extensive onboarding process. It would take almost about a month for engineers to get up to speed because we had generated a lot of documentation. There was a lot of videos. There was a lot of talks of me saying stuff about how you should operate. And that was many of this came out of engineers. I don't believe in silver bullets or one quick hack to make things better, but I do have a silver bullet, a quick hack to make your onboarding process better, especially when you're scaling rapidly as we were doing. We asked every single person who was onboarding as their very first task to go and update the onboarding documentation with the things that they wished had been written down when they joined and that would have made their onboarding way easier. And eventually we landed up with this really great package of onboarding stuff that engineers could work through and give them that foundation. But again, still, we would have people join the teams that did not get the message, and it's always going to be the case. So it came down to two things. Firstly, it was leadership had those values and was strongly connected with their engineers in the squads. We had great tech leadership that was there not to decide things for people, never to tell them what to do, but instead spend time coaching them, showing them things, making things visible to them. And that helped a lot. And we had other great team members there that were modeling these really good behaviors so they'd be able to look around and see, oh, okay, like this is the way we do things here.
Hi there. So I have two questions. I used to work in mobile development, so I'm very curious about how you solved those two. One is that you said you had continuous delivery
Yep.
with zero tech debt, but you have iOS and Android. And when I worked at Android team and iOS team, we always had fragmentation because we couldn't catch up with each other. So that would lead lots of tech debt because you would try to catch up with them. I'm just curious how you solve this one.
Yeah, how do we solve that problem? The wrong way, actually. Where we got to with that is it came into that thing around releasing features behind feature toggles. And so that meant we could release things when we were ready. And it meant there was a lot less pressure on the team, on the iOS team or the Android, whoever's behind. There was a lot less pressure for them to catch up because you're not trying to jump on a release train. You can just ship your thing when it's done. It also meant we could ship stuff on Android first or on iOS first and do things that way. We had strong cultural things. We had that developer dashboard that was like surfacing things. So we're able to get a lot of visibility on where corners were being cut and just have good conversations about it and go, oh, look, we're getting an F for unit test coverage. How we feel about that? Oh, yeah, okay, we're happy about it. We're not happy about it. Turns out that, and we did all this great work and we're able to actually bring our Android and iOS releases really closely into alignment so they'd all turn on at the same time with very little pressure, which was actually the wrong answer. Turns out we should have gone the other way. There was some recent work done where we looked at the numbers and we realized that those tasks where one team had led off early and the other had followed later, and they were released and developed out of sync, the second team following things through was massively more efficient in building their feature out. They were taking less than half the time to build the feature because the first team had already solved all the hard problems and figured out all of the hard stuff. So the direction that we're looking at leaning most recently is actually towards decoupling them and leaning into that and going, no, we don't want to release at the same time. We want only one team to take the heavy hit of figuring out what needs to be built. And once we've actually created it, we're going to have the other team coast along and drift behind them in all of that, all that flow that they've created and build what they're doing really efficiently.
Cool. If it's okay, I want to ask the very quick one, the second one.
Quick question, quick answer.
Yep.
I heard you say feature flags. That's what we did too. It doesn't scale at all. I'm curious how you made it scale.
How do we? I don't know. We just did. It is hard. I think having the teams and squads manage their own feature flags and be responsible for them helped out a lot. Also, we use them to cut off like new features in development. It gets a lot harder when you want to put something like a refactoring behind a feature flag. That's a much difficult and harder problem.
Last question.
Thanks, Luke. Great presentation. Probably a follow-on from the previous question, actually. But curious with the team setup, particularly around the platforms and enablement teams, whether you considered having iOS and Android coexisting in the same team, or whether you kept a clear delineation between the two?
Oh man, that was a perennial topic of conversation on how much we should align between platforms. And actually, I told a white lie in my slides. I showed a separate platform enablement team because going back to the theory, the fundamentals, this comes from a book called Team Topologies. They're two different things. We actually had them all merged and blended into one practically at the ground level at ANZ. So we actually, with these empowered engineers, we felt that there was a real tendency and a desire in them. They wanted to shift naturally between platform and enablement roles. And they hated the idea that we were going to put them in a box and say, nah, you're a platform engineer, you only do platform. You're an enablement engineer, you only do enablement. So we kept that all blurry and gray and worked really well, surprisingly. With iOS and Android, the fundamental stuff that they're doing down at a platform level was pretty different, and they're facing some pretty significantly different challenges. So we did talk a medium amount. They weren't really, I wouldn't go so far as to say they're sort of embedded at the same team, but we'd get together at least once a fortnight and have a good chat about the problems. on the ground level with specific tasks, a lot of engineers would cross-pollinate across iOS and Android. So there was still a great deal of communication there between the two teams, but it wasn't at an actual level where we had them merged or we're trying to ship the same things at the same time and build them the same way across iOS and Android in the platform.
Cool. Thank you very much, Luke. Another round of applause. We'll be hanging around here for as long as we want. Luke, how can people reach out to you if they want to ask more questions?
That's CTO School Slack.
Yeah,
Get in the Slack.
Thank you for the plug. Right, thank you everybody for coming along. There's plenty of snacks. Please enjoy yourself. And yeah, hope you come to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.